Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're executive directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. What does the U.S. Constitution look like from the perspective of Black Americans? Our guest today, Elie Mystal, will tell us.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
How do Black Americans perceive the U.S. Constitution? Our provocative guest, Elie Mystal, says the Constitution was written by a bunch of rich, white, Christian racist male politicians making deals with each other. Elie Mystal is an attorney who graduated from Harvard Law School. He often appears on MSNBC and is the justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, where he writes about the courts and the criminal justice system. He's an Alfred Knobler Fellow at the Type Media Center and legal editor of the More Perfect podcast on the Supreme Court for Radiolab.
Elie Mystal is an outspoken supporter of civil rights, abortion rights, and legal rights and protections for LGBTQ-plus individuals. He's on the board of Demand Justice, and he's author of a great book, the New York Times bestseller, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. He's recently spoken at FFRF's National Convention, where he received our Clarence Darrow Award. Thank you so much for joining us today, Elie Mystal.
Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
Pretty good. Before we get into legal details, you caught our eye last year when you tweeted something about what happened to you when you took one of your children to get a blood test. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, so it was actually my youngest son, who's 8 now, but at the time was 7, was getting his tonsils out. So we, had to go to the hospital. We were admitting him. We were doing all the paperwork, the electronic paperwork to admit him. And they asked us, age, weight, height, all that kind of stuff. And then they asked his religion. And again, the kid's 7. So I was like, first I was like, what? And then I was like, why? And she was like, oh, it's just a question we ask. And I'm like, well, he's 7. He doesn't have a religion at 7. And so the woman was very nice. She was like, okay. And then there was a pause, and she was like, well, I have to put something into the form. And I'm like, again, why? Why does this form require? But it's electronic, and with computers or whatever. So eventually I'm like, all right, put it down as Minecraft. That's his religion.
So it sounds to me like you're doing the right thing and letting your children grow up to be old enough to understand religion and decide for themselves.
Yeah, no, we try to explain what religions are, all the different ones. Hanukkah, we tell the Hanukkah story. Our babysitter, our main babysitter for our kids, is Muslim, so we talk a lot about her religion and her traditions and whatever. My wife and I were both raised Catholic, so we talk a little bit about that, but we talk about it in the way that one teaches children to learn about anything, right? I don't think that we talk about Jesus Christ any more than we talk about blue jays, right? Oh, it's a blue jay, it's a bird, it does this and that. Jesus, it's a story, he does that, right? We try to present it that way as opposed to imposing, anything upon them. And, because what we want for them to be is respectful of other people's religions, right? We don't want them to be callous, I guess I think is the word that comes up in my head about other people's beliefs and traditions and whatever. But they should be free to kind of, as they get older, do their own research and come to their own conclusions about whether or not they want to be people of faith.
And what conclusions have you come to?
Well, I go back and forth sometimes. Like on a good day, I'm a lapsed Catholic. On a bad day, I'm keening towards atheism. There's just put it like this. I believe in science, right? And so I kind of start there. I would like to believe that there's something more, but it's not something that I think about or work with in my professional life, right? Like that's really outside the scope of what I do for a living. And I spend so much time working and parenting that if it's not centered in my work and it's not centered in my parenting, then it's really not centered in my life. And that's kind of where I go back and forth on it.
So what happened? Did they put down Minecraft on the forum?
They put down Minecraft.
That's great.
because I wasn't giving them any, like that whole thing that I just told you about how we're raised Catholic. I wasn't giving them anything of that because it's not just that it's an inappropriate question. It's the kind of question that only gets off the form when parents like me complain. Yeah. Right. And so I wanted to kind of register my complaint and disregard for this question, even if it's just a drop in the ocean. There's absolutely no reason why you should be asking a 7-year-old what their religion is. Because again, first of all, you're not asking the 7-year-old, you realize, right? You're asking the parents to impose that on the 7-year-old. And I just wasn't about that.
Yeah, well, good for you. And I bet a lot of children's religion really is Minecraft.
So,
right? It's not like I asked the religion of the doctor that was taking his tonsils out, right? I asked the doctors, do your hands shake? Yes, no. If no, then we're good.
Well, I love your attitude, Elie. This is you have a certain edge, and it comes through in your book. I love your book. The way you write about the law, but it has such a, I guess, fun edge, and it even has a pretty provocative edge to it. And for example, you write that the U.S. Constitution is trash. Why do you say that?
Well, at the founding, it was. Think about all of the things, all of the rights and protections that the Constitution as written didn't have, right? Didn't have any protections for women, didn't have any protections for racial minorities, didn't have any protections for people, for LGBTQ people. That's not good, right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then if you look at just structurally how they did certain things, right? The equal suffrage of the states in the Senate is just stupid. It just gives outsized power to land as opposed to people. That's dumb. The fact that we didn't have popular elections for the Senate at the founding, to say nothing of the fact that we still don't have a popular election for the president, that's also dumb. Like as documents go, the Constitution was a work in progress. It was hastily cobbled together over a summer by people who were sent to actually amend the Articles of Confederation and just kind of went rogue and wrote their own thing over a summer. Just think about it from that perspective, right? Think about how long it took to write the U.S. Constitution. Can you imagine in the modern context, let's say Germany was going to redo its constitution. Do you think they'd take 3 months? Right? Do you think they'd go to Frankfurt for 3 months and whip something out? No. There'd be research, there'd be study, there'd be tests, there'd be polling, there'd be all this stuff that would go into the writing of the Constitution that we did not do in 1787. And that's just at the top level. As you get kind of deeper into it and compare our Constitution to other modern democracies, you see its failures. Now, I will give the U.S. Constitution credit as being one of the first, right? And so you get points for being first out of the gate, right? When we were doing our Constitution, Europe was still kind of doing kings and queens and all that kind of stuff. So go us, I guess. But history did not stop in 1787, right? And so as Europe and Africa and South America became constitutional democracies, they had to write new constitutions. And what we see on the world stage is that a lot of constitutions are simply better at protecting fundamental human rights and fundamental human dignity than our Constitution is. So the example that I use for this, Dave, is always the South African Constitution, right? South Africa, horrible racial apartheid, a bad situation. I don't have to go into it, right? When Mandela is freed, when de Klerk does the power sharing, when South Africa rewrites its constitution, what did it do? Did it just tack on some amendments at the margins, adding a different, rims on a car? No, they threw the whole thing out, started over. They started over in South Africa with a delegation that represented all of South Africa, right? Black South Africans and white South Africans and women, all involved in the crafting of the South African Constitution. That's one of the reasons why it's good.
One good thing in favor of our Constitution, and that is that it was godless. And it was the first to separate state and church.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for a bit, because on paper, it is certainly godless. But on paper, we have two kind of competing ideas right in the heart of the First Amendment, right? One is the idea that the government should not establish religion. That's called the Establishment Clause. The other is the idea that people should be free to practice whatever religion they want. That's the Free Exercise Clause. And those two clauses have actually always been in tension in American history, right? Because what one person's free exercise of their religion is another person's establishment of religion if you do it wrong. And one of our, I think, great failings for living up to the promises of the First Amendment is that, for the most part, the Establishment Clause gets the short shrift, right? It always draws the short straw. When there's a conflict between free exercise and establishment, free exercise almost always wins. And so the Establishment Clause is kind of like the rump of the First Amendment. It's there, and we like it, and we like to talk about it, but in practice, we don't apply the Establishment Clause nearly as much as we should. One great example I would point out: everybody has December 25th off, right? The only places that work on December 25th are like the Chinese takeout store, right? Now that's why December 25th? Why not December 2nd? We all know why December 25th is a holiday. It's a Christian holiday. It's a religious holiday. If we were a truly secular country, the day that everybody would have off would be the Monday after the Super Bowl. If we were just doing it based on the popular will and what people are actually doing at the time, the Monday after the Super Bowl would be Boxing Day. But we don't do it that way because the Establishment Clause always gets, oh yeah, we'll talk about that at some point, right? That all gets, just to keep going with the thought, that all gets hypercharged with the current conservative Supreme Court.
And I know that you've written about the Bremerton decision, for example.
The current Supreme Court, the 6 conservatives are, I would say, theocrats. Their mode of thinking is along theocratic lines. And so what they have done to the law is that they've basically taken the free exercise clause, which has always been kind of on top and pushing down the Establishment Clause. And they've taken the free exercise clause and they've supercharged it. And they've used it as a way to impose religion at the federal level on people who don't agree with it. And we see that all up and down through their decisions. I think, one obvious one is the abortion ruling, the Dobbs v. Jackson ruling, which overturned Roe v. Wade. Remember, the forced birth argument, the anti-abortion argument, is fundamentally a religious argument.
Yes.
Right? It's fundamentally a religious proposition that life starts at conception. I know it's a religious proposition because not all religions agree about that. Many Jewish rabbis will tell you that life does not begin until birth. That's when the soul gets into the body, according to many rabbis. Many imams do not believe that life begins at conception. It is a particular Christian Catholic version of science that says that life begins at conception. The secular compromise is something that we had. It was called Roe v. Wade, and it was called fetal viability, right? The secular compromise between you think life starts at conception and I think life starts at birth is fetal viability. When the fetus can survive outside the mother, therefore not requiring the unwilling forced labor of the pregnant person, when the fetus can survive without the pregnant person, then the state can have a compelling secular interest in the best health and opportunity and whatever for the fetus. But before that, when it cannot survive outside of the pregnant person's body, then this is an issue for the mother, for the woman, for the pregnant person, not for the state government. That is a secular compromise on the question, and that is the compromise that the conservatives on the Supreme Court, the theocrats on the Supreme Court, threw out when they overturned Dobbs.
Yes, you're so right. They're extremists. I think they are theocrats. We are talking with Elie Mystal about his book, Allow Me to Retort. And when we come back, Elie, we want to talk about originalism a little bit.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name is Bill, and I'm an out-of-the-closet apatheist, meaning I don't really care what you believe, and I don't really think that you should care what I believe. I was raised in South Dakota in a strict Catholic family. I was an altar boy. I served Mass a lot of Sundays twice. The priest gave us this little card that said, "In case of accident, please call a priest." I don't really like that idea anymore since I left the church about 40 years ago. Now, if you find me alongside the road after an accident, please call an ambulance and an EMT.
Welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Nation magazine justice correspondent and commentator Elie Mystal about his best-selling book, Allow Me to Retort, a Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. So we were talking about the current conservative Supreme Court and about interpreting the First Amendment tension between the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And one of the big issues in your book, a beef that you have, is this tool that conservatives are using called originalism. What is it and what's wrong with it?
Yeah, so originalism is an interpretive method for the Constitution when the text is not clear. And we can talk later about times when the text is clear or isn't clear. That's a different issue. But when the text is not clear, originalists say that we are supposed to go back to the original public meaning of the words as they would have been understood by the people who wrote them, right? So when we're talking about the First Amendment or issues about freedom of religion, we're talking about the original public meaning as would have been understood by James Madison, the person who wrote the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, or the other constitutional authors, signers. They'll go to the Federalist Papers look at Alexander Hamilton's, they'll look at Thomas Jefferson, they'll look at the people at the founding and what they thought. And the problem with that, at least just even from what we're talking about, is that they were all super Christian crazy people. And so when we think about their original understanding when they were writing these laws, their original understanding is entirely out of step with modern viewpoints about religion, right? They lived in a world where God was assumed. And God's providence over the country was thought to be needed. I mean, we talk about these founders as if they're kind of Enlightenment heroes. And sure, I suppose if you compare them to some of their contemporaries, right? I'll take Thomas Jefferson over Pope Leo, whoever was in charge back in the day, right? But compared to a modern secular nation, these people were entirely out of step. And one of the ways I like to highlight just how out of step they were is talking about the Eighth Amendment, right? So Eighth Amendment bars cruel and unusual punishment. Originalists will say, we got to go back and look at what James Madison and them meant about cruel and unusual. And it turns out when you look at the sources, when you look at the history, James Madison was the kind of guy who could eat a sandwich while watching a man be hung from the neck till death. That was their world. They could live with executions were a normal part of their world. Were they religious when it came to the death penalty? Oh, hell no. Right? They said they got medieval when it came to the death penalty at the founding of the country. Is that what we are stuck with for all time? No. Are we not able to say, like, okay, I understand that James Madison was a man of his times and Thomas Jefferson was a man of his times, and that those times were barbaric, and we're not going to live in those times anymore, and we're going to have a more robust understanding of what cruelty is and what punishments should be allowed. So originalists will say, no, we can never look to our modern context. We can never progress. We must always be ossified in this dark past where people, again, could eat a sandwich during a public hanging. And so that is my fundamental problem with originalism. It locks us in to the best ideas people had 2.5 centuries ago.
And it acts as if the Constitution is a Bible that we have to take literally.
That is always funny to me when we talk about religion, because other countries, right? If you look at France, if you look at Italy, they are organized around racial, ethnic, and geographic lines, right? America is organized around an idea, right? We're organized around the idea, whether it's freedom, democracy, however you want to put the idea, it changes over the course of the times. But the thing that unifies us is an idea. We have no shared race, ethnicity, geographic boundaries, right? And so what binds us is, in some ways, the Constitution. And that's a problem because the Constitution, as I said, was a work in progress. It was always supposed to be a work in progress. They wrote changing the Constitution right into the Constitution.
Yes.
The Ninth Amendment literally says there are more rights here than I can possibly name. So just know that there are more and move on. The Constitution is a work in progress. But when we treat it like gospel, when we treat it like it came down from a mount in a burning bush, put it into a stone tablet or whatever, then we ossify ourselves. We hobble ourselves into, again, a dark past that was never the intention of the men who wrote it in the first place.
But isn't that the definition of conservatism right there? These conservative justices want to use originalism as a tool to justify not progressing.
Right. So, one of the ways that I look at it is this. If you're a conservative and you want to tell me that the Constitution as written does not fully protect a woman's right to her own body, does not fully protect LGBTQ rights to fall in love and get married, does not fully protect a racial minority's right to vote. If you want to tell me that your interpretation of the Constitution does not protect all of these rights, then the next thing out of your mouth better be how you are working tirelessly on constitutional amendments that will fully protect those rights.
Yeah.
Because if that's not the next thing out of your mouth, if you say the Constitution doesn't protect this and you're not interested in amending the Constitution to protect it, then I don't think you're making a good faith argument. Then I think what you're really saying is you don't want women to have rights, and you don't want LGBTQ people to have rights, and you don't want racial minorities to have rights.
And that's exactly what they are.
If you honestly believe that the Constitution doesn't protect us, then, and you're not spending all your time doing the work so that it can in the future, then you must be happy with the outcome. And that is where I have a huge problem.
We only have about 2 minutes left. We have this Constitution. I think we're stuck with it. How do we make it work?
I just mentioned the amendment process. That's always there. Unfortunately, you need 3/4 of the states to ratify the amendments, and the states themselves have a lot of the constitutional problems that I'm already talking about. I'm a big fan of expanding the courts, expanding the number of justices on the court to overtop and to drown out the voices of the Catholic theocrats on the court. I think we need more justices. I think we need more justices who are, when I talk about litmus tests for judges, I'm not talking even about the whatever political legal issue of the moment there is, right? I'm not talking about a litmus test in terms of are you Democratic or Republican. I want my litmus test for judges to be, do you believe that all people are people and deserve people rights, right? Because that's start number one. Like, if we can't agree who's a people, then you can't be on my Supreme Court, right? So number one, litmus test, do you agree that all people are people and deserve people rights? Number two, do you think that maybe the unelected, unaccountable Supreme Court should have less power, and that we should more regularly look to the will of President and Congress, who, while they have their own problems, people actually voted for? And if you are a Supreme Court judge, and there are those out there, if you're a judge or a would-be Supreme Court justice who thinks that the courts themselves should have less power, I'm interested to read your newsletter.
Well, thank you.
There's so much we didn't get into. You will have to read the book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, and it's been a real pleasure. Elie Mystal.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because Freethought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.